The Queen of Soul didn't get mad at people very often, but when she did, everyone knew about it. Picture this. Behind the stage at a big music theater, everyone was nervous and upset. Aretha Franklin sits in her room getting ready. Quiet, like a real queen, strong and calm. Then, without getting excited at all, she closes her makeup box and says, "If he sings tonight, I'm leaving." That was how powerful Aretha was. She didn't need to be on stage to be the boss of a room, just a look, a word, or staying quiet. This is the top 7 musicians Aretha Franklin hated the most. Number 1, Beyoncé. In 2008, one sentence started one of music's biggest fights that nobody saw coming. It wasn't said quietly backstage. It wasn't written in gossip magazines. It happened on live TV at the Grammy Awards with millions of people watching. Beyoncé, looking beautiful and confident, walked up to the microphone to talk about the famous Tina Turner. With a big smile, she said, "Tina, the Queen." Everyone clapped really loud. But somewhere far away, another queen sat quietly. Aretha Franklin. To most people, it was just a nice thing to say. But to Aretha, who had spent more than 40 years fighting for and keeping her title as the Queen of Soul, it was like someone challenging her. The name wasn't just a nickname. It was something she earned through church music, civil rights songs, and being the best singer ever. To hear it casually given to someone else, even in a different type of music, wasn't an accident. It was being mean. Within hours, Aretha put out a statement. She didn't say Beyoncé's name directly, but everyone knew who she meant. She called what Beyoncé said a cheap shot and not showing respect. The words hit the music world like thunder. Fans argued about whether this was just diva attitude or something more serious. The people closest to Aretha said it was more serious. She wasn't protecting her ego, one close friend explained. She was protecting history. When she talked privately, she was even meaner. Friends remember her saying Beyoncé was a talented girl who forgot to bow down. For Aretha, it wasn't about how good Beyoncé was at singing. It was about saying thank you to the people who came before. She had fought to make space in a business that always tried to shut up black women. And here was a younger artist she had taught, changing the story without even saying thank you. Beyoncé, on her part, never said anything back directly. In public, she stayed nice, often saying good things about Aretha as someone who taught her. In interviews, she called her the best singer ever. And when Aretha died in 2018, Beyoncé and Jay-Z did a performance to remember her, saying she was the reason we all sing. But Aretha never forgot what happened. After 2008, she stayed away from events where Beyoncé was the main star, said no to performing with her, and turned down chances where their names might be together. The silence was on purpose, and it meant something. Was this fight ever fixed? Not really. Aretha stood her ground until the very end. To her, respect wasn't just a song name. It was how she lived her life. And once it was broken, she rarely fixed it. Today, Beyoncé keeps honoring Aretha's memory, while the Queen of Soul's private words still ring out. Crowns aren't borrowed, they're earned. Number 2. Luther Vandross. Aretha Franklin had always believed soul was something you carried inside you. To her, singing wasn't like math. It wasn't about scales, charts, or plans. It was spirit. You let the Holy Ghost in, and you let it pour out. That way of thinking took her from the church of her father to the world stage where she became the clear queen of soul. Luther Vandross, on the other hand, was like a builder. Young, smart, and already famous in the early 1980s as one of the best producers in the business, he was known for wanting everything perfect. Every note had to be polished. Every harmony had to sit exactly where he put it. If Aretha was fire, Luther was glass, exact, clean, controlled. When Clive Davis put them together for her 1982 comeback album, Jump to It, it seemed like a dream. Fire and skill, old and new, the Queen of Soul meeting the Prince of Perfection. At first, the recording session seemed promising, but it didn't take long before sparks turned to smoke. Luther's way of working clashed with Aretha's feelings. He wanted singing fixed, runs cut down, words said exactly right. Aretha got upset at being told what to do. To her, it felt like someone trying to put chains on her crown. She sang from her heart, not from a rule book. What started as small tension, mumbled comments, Long recording sessions that went on too long soon grew into a war of who was right. The breaking point came during a late-night recording session. With anger written all over his face, Vandross reportedly snapped, "Stop singing too much. Silence." Aretha froze. Then, with the quiet anger only she could show, she stood up, looked him right in the eye, and answered, "Nobody tells the Queen how to reign." She picked up her coat and walked straight out of the studio. The album was finally finished, and Jump to It became a hit. But behind every beautiful harmony was an argument. Every polished song hid a fight. Aretha would later admit privately, "He made good music, but he made it terrible to make." In her life storybook, From These Roots, she was even more direct. "All of a sudden, Luther wanted to tell me how to sing. When it was me he had learned so much about singing from. If he wanted to sing it like that, then he should have sung it himself. His job was to produce and give advice, not tell me, 'Sing it like this.'" Luther, of course, had his side of the story. In interviews, he said the Aretha he worked with was distant and demanding, nothing like the warm, friendly voice he had grown up hearing on the radio. "The Aretha I had heard throughout my childhood wasn't the Aretha I heard on the phone," he once told Daily Mail. To him, the icon he looked up to as a boy seemed to disappear once the studio doors closed. Still, there was grudging respect. In a 1983 Jet magazine interview, Aretha admitted, "When I say this, I say it with respect. Luther and I really do like each other. We have a lot of mutual respect. Even when we are not talking, we are still cool. Call it Aries butting heads. We're both too stubborn." But even then, she couldn't help but throw in some shade. "He was lying at the base of his radio listening to me," she joked. "I wasn't lying there listening to him." The fight went on for years. They clashed again on her 1983 record, Get It Right, where their arguments were so heated that Aretha stormed out of the session in the middle of a song. Studio people compared them to an old married couple fighting over who gets the last word. And yet, despite the friction, they always came back to each other. They made up, recorded more hits, and finally grew close again. When Vandross died in 2005, Aretha cried for him openly. "He was one of the best singers and songwriters of our time," she said, much nicer than how she talked in those tense early recording sessions. Their fight never fully went away. It lived in sharp comments, mean remarks, and the stories they left behind. But it ended not in hate but in understanding each other. Respect at last, if not always in the studio. Number 3, Ray Charles. Aretha Franklin built her career on being perfect. Every note she sang was done on purpose, based on control and practice. To her, music was both freedom and rules. You could make things up as you went, but only if you respected the structure. That was the rule that made her the Queen of Soul. Ray Charles lived by a different rule known as the genius. Charles loved making things up as he went. He could take a phrase, stretch it, twist it, bend it until you couldn't recognize it, and then land it with brilliance. He believed soul was taking chances. Chaos turned into beauty. So when the two giants came together in the mid-1970s for a nationally televised duet, the world expected fireworks. The TV network promoted it as historic. Practice sessions were smooth, happy even. They laughed, shared stories, and sang together with ease. On paper, it was perfect. But when the cameras rolled, something changed. Charles began to go off track, making bridges longer, throwing in fancy parts, bending the rhythm until it no longer looked like what they had practiced. What was supposed to be a tight, elegant performance became a minefield of making things up. Aretha, always the perfect professional, tried to keep up. To the audience, it looked spontaneous. To her, it felt planned. And then came the moment that broke everything. Off camera, after the recording, Charles chuckled to producers. "She's great, but not quick on her feet." That one line cut deeper than the performance itself. Aretha had built her empire on being exact, on control, on grace, under pressure. To be made fun of, especially by someone she looked up to, was more than being mean. It was embarrassing. She never forgave him. In private, she told friends bluntly, he tried to turn a duet into a solo and me into his joke. From that day on, she refused to perform with him again. Not on television, not on tour, not even in private recording sessions. To Aretha, it wasn't just about one messed-up performance. It was betrayal. A man she once called brother had taken her spotlight and twisted it into a stunt. Ray Charles, for his part, never publicly talked about the tension. Friends of his later said he didn't see it as sabotage, just Ray being Ray, a man who lived in the moment and couldn't resist the thrill of making things up. But for Aretha, that explanation didn't matter. What mattered was respect. And in her eyes, Charles had broken that bond. The two stayed polite in public, but the coldness was obvious. As one insider put it, they never yelled, but the silence between them could freeze a room. The fight never healed. Aretha carried the hurt with her for the rest of her life, and she never shared a stage with Ray Charles again. It wasn't personal, at least not at first. It was about what's right. Aretha Franklin stood for being perfect, practice, and respect for the music. Ray Charles represented a version of soul she couldn't trust. Loose, unpredictable, and in her eyes, careless. And for the Queen of Soul, that wasn't just a different style. It was a betrayal of what soul was supposed to be. Number 4. Keith Richards. If there was one thing that hurt Aretha Franklin more than most, it was being ignored. Not disagreement, not rivalry. Being ignored. For the Queen of Soul, legacy wasn't a word thrown around lightly. It was sacred, earned through church music, civil rights stages, and a voice that shook the very heart of American music. So when Keith Richards, rock star, Rolling Stones guitar player, and someone who always said shocking things, sat down for a 2007 Rolling Stone interview, what he said wasn't just careless. It was, in Aretha's eyes, unforgivable. "Soul died with Otis Redding," Richards said casually. "Aretha's still around, but it's not the same." To some, it sounded like just another cranky comment from a man famous for them. But to Aretha, it was an eraser. 40 years of artistry reduced to an afterthought. She had carried the torch of soul through decades, topped charts the Stones could only dream of, and outlasted nearly all of her peers. And here was Keith Richards making her life's work seem like a shadow beneath a man who had been gone for decades. Aretha didn't stay quiet. In a rare radio interview shortly after, she gave a response only she could make. "Some people confuse loud guitars with depth. Bless his heart." The line was graceful, cutting, and unforgettable. But behind the scenes, she was furious. Friends remember her complaining privately, "He sat in the front row while I built this. He knows better." To her, Richards' words weren't just criticism. They were betrayal from a peer who had watched her change the music type. Richards, true to form, never said sorry. He didn't take the comment back or try to explain. To those who knew him, that was Keith. Restless, shocking, unwilling to smooth the edges. But for Aretha, the silence only made the insult louder. People close to the situation say she banned talk of the Stones from future appearances. She said no to co-headlining offers, refused award shows where Richards was being honored, and promised never to share a stage with him again. He became, in her world, a ghost. "Legacy isn't a game," she reportedly told one close friend. "It's blood, it's sacrifice, and I won't let anyone write mine away." The fight never ended because it never healed. Publicly, Aretha covered it in elegance. Privately, she held her line. For her, Richard symbolized something bigger than a careless comment. He represented a rock world that often tried to write over soul to crown itself the music type of record, while borrowing freely from its roots. Keith Richards may have thought he was making an offhand remark. To Aretha Franklin, it was ignoring everything she fought for. And once you lost her respect, you didn't get it back. Number 5. Eminem. Aretha Franklin didn't just represent Detroit. She was Detroit. The churches, the record stores, the soul clubs. Her voice rose from its streets and became the heartbeat of the city. For decades, she gave back constantly, hosting benefit concerts, teaching young artists, and representing her hometown in every corner of the world. So when Eminem exploded onto the world stage in the early 2000s, becoming the face of Detroit for a new generation, Aretha expected at least a nod, a name mention, a sample, something. But it never came. In song after song, Eminem shouted out hip-hop legends, rock stars, even fellow Detroit natives like Kid Rock, but never Aretha. Not once. To casual fans, it looked like an innocent mistake. To Aretha, it felt like something else entirely, being erased. She had broken barriers in an industry that wasn't built for her. She paved the way, not just for women, but for every artist who came out of Detroit with something to prove, including him. At a private dinner when someone brought up Eminem's rise, Aretha reportedly leaned back, shook her head and said, "He knows who I am. He just chose not to care." When asked in later interviews about what she thought of his music, she didn't rant or lecture. She gave a single word: quiet, but cutting noise. That was Aretha's way. She didn't need a public fight. She didn't clap back in songs or chase headlines. Her silence was its own judgment. In her world, if she gave you her blessing, it meant everything. And if she kept it back, that meant something too. Eminem, for his part, never talked about leaving her out directly. He never disrespected Aretha publicly, but he never embraced her either. To many, it seemed like a generational gap. He was the face of a raw, angry new Detroit, while she was the royal matriarch of its past. But to Aretha, the divide wasn't about style. It was about respect. The distance between them never closed. No collaborations, no tributes, no making up. Even after Aretha's passing in 2018, Eminem stayed silent, offering no public statement. For her, that silence confirmed what she had always believed, that he knew and simply chose not to care. The fight never erupted, but it never ended either. It was a freeze, permanent and unspoken. Because in Aretha Franklin's world, respect wasn't just a song. It was the standard. And once she decided you hadn't earned it, there was no coming back. Number 6. Dionne Warwick. By the time 2017 arrived, Aretha Franklin was already fighting the kind of sickness that drained even her legendary strength. She had cut back public appearances, saving her energy, choosing her battles carefully. But then, a headline came up that lit a fire she couldn't ignore. The spark had actually been struck years earlier. At Whitney Houston's funeral in 2012, Dionne Warwick, Whitney's cousin and another veteran of the Golden Age, stepped up to the microphone and, in a moment that seemed harmless to many, made a pointed remark. Aretha was expected to be here, but she's not. What Warwick didn't mention was why Aretha had been physically unable to attend. Swollen feet, emotional exhaustion, and overwhelming grief had kept her home. To the world, it sounded like a footnote. To Aretha, it was a dagger. She stayed quiet at the time, but 5 years later, she unloaded. In April 2017, she put out a 5-page letter to the Associated Press, an extraordinary move for an artist who almost never aired grievances publicly. The letter was harsh. She accused Warwick of obvious lies, of making up drama, and of using a sacred moment of mourning to stir gossip. She ended the statement with a single unforgettable line. "Dionne knows what she did." No explanation, no apology, just a velvet-gloved dagger. The fight didn't come out of nowhere. Aretha and Dionne's rivalry had roots going back to the 1960s. Franklin once recorded a chart-topping version of Warwick's signature hit, "I Say a Little Prayer," a move that some saw as a tribute, but others viewed as a strategic show of dominance. Years later, tensions got worse as both women became tied to Clive Davis's empire, while Warwick's cousin Whitney Houston came up as a generational talent. Franklin hated the shifting spotlight, and Warwick, by blood and by industry connections, was always at the center of that storm. By the time Warwick's comment at Whitney's funeral hit the press, it wasn't just about attendance. To Aretha, it was decades of rivalry squeezed into one sentence. Warwick's response was characteristically calm, even dismissive. When asked about Franklin's fury, she simply said, "She's feisty." That's Aretha. To her, it was little more than Franklin being Franklin, an old pattern of competitiveness and suspicion. But for Aretha, it was final. Friends say she promised never to share a stage, a tribute, or even a bill with Warwick again. To her, this wasn't diva dramatics. It was principle. "We've never been friends," she admitted in one interview, "and I don't think Dionne has ever liked me." The fight never healed. It ended not with making up, but with Aretha's passing in 2018. Warwick offered public condolences, but the icy distance between them remained frozen in history. Two icons bound by parallel legacies divided by mistrust. To fans, it was confusing. To Aretha, it was simple. Respect wasn't optional, and once you violated it, you were gone. Number 7. Billy Joel. Among all the names on Aretha Franklin's list, Billy Joel may be the most surprising, not because of any public fight, but because of what could have been a natural friendship. Both were giants of their craft. Both carried deep respect for musical heritage, and both could command a room with nothing more than their instruments, her voice, his piano. On paper it seemed certain they would find harmony, but underneath the surface a quiet split simmered, one that had less to do with talent and more to do with respect, or the lack of it. In the early 2000s, the idea of a joint concert was suggested, a celebration of piano-driven soul and pop, a night where the Queen of Soul and the Piano Man would share the stage. Aretha agreed to a rehearsal, cautiously hopeful. Joel was one of the few modern artists she truly respected, a songwriter she believed honored the lineage of those who came before him. But once they sat down to work, something felt wrong. Joel was warm but casual to the point of talking down to her. His humor, easygoing, crowd-pleasing on stage, landed differently in rehearsal. During a break, he reportedly chuckled and said, "Come on, Ree, loosen up. Take a shot of whiskey and lighten the mood." For Aretha, who never drank and who built her career on being exact and proper, it was more than tone-deaf. It was insulting. She didn't need alcohol to command respect. She never had. She stood up, closed her music, packed her things, and left. No shouting, no dramatic scene, just silence. And according to one witness, the sharp slam of a piano lid that said everything words didn't. Later, she told a close friend, "He plays piano like a poet, but talks like a fool." The concert was quietly canceled. No press release, no explanation, just gone. From that moment forward, Billy Joel's name disappeared from her orbit. No duets, no mutual tributes, no shared stages. Industry insiders say Aretha even said no to invitations to appear at events where Joel was featured, not out of pettiness, but out of principle, because to her, respect was the music behind the music. And once it was gone, so was the relationship. Billy Joel never publicly commented on the fallout. He praised Aretha in interviews over the years, calling her one of the greatest voices of all time, but he never addressed the canceled collaboration. Whether out of diplomacy or regret, he left the silence intact. To this day, the split remains a quiet footnote in two towering careers. To the public, there was no explosion, no headlines. But to Aretha Franklin, that rehearsal was enough. She believed legacies weren't built on charm or casual jokes. They were built on respect. And when Billy Joel crossed that line, even lightly, he found himself on the wrong side of history. In the end, Aretha Franklin's grudges weren't about petty rivalries. They were about principle. To her, respect was sacred. And once it was broken, there was no going back. From Beyoncé to Billy Joel, the Queen of Soul carried those scars as fiercely as she carried her crown. Which of these fights surprised you the most? Do you think Aretha was right to draw such hard lines, or did she take things too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories like this.